Hello, this is Richard Thornton with the People of One Fire. I'll be your tour guide on this fascinating trip back through time. Unlike most of the people who talk about the Native American sites in the lower southeast, I am a proud descendant of Georgia's indigenous Creek and Yuchi peoples. Of course, I'm not full-blood. I don't pretend to be something that I'm not. However, we can trace all of our Creek and Yuchi ancestors at least back to the middle 1750s. We know every one of them's name. That's important. This is my homeland. I learned the Kusa, Kusawati, and Etowah rivers the good old-fashioned way, living there. For 15 years, I lived near Etowah Mounds, the site of Kusa, or downtown Rome, Georgia. On most weekends, I'd go out canoeing or hiking or cross-country skiing, something that, and intimately learn the geography of that part of the country. That's very important because on several occasions I caught archaeologists making mistakes because they were from elsewhere and did not really understand the geography and geology of the region that they were studying. During 2012 through 2017, I was paid by a company in Columbus, Georgia, to analyze all available information on archaeological sites along the major rivers and coastlines of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, the South Carolina Lowcountry, western North Carolina, and eastern Tennessee. After reading hundreds of archaeological reports, it became obvious that many archaeologists did not do their ethnological homework before interpreting artifacts and sites. Now let me explain. That doesn't mean that they were not competent in the technology of excavating artifacts and of the remnants of structures. But what I found was that the body of knowledge from which they evaluated those artifacts was faulty to begin with, but mainly developed in the mid 20th century, has not really changed that much in the last 40 years. This is important because if you close your mind to new information, you're going to make mistakes. First, we'll start with an introduction to the Kusa, Etowah, and Coosawattee River basins, and of course the King Archaeological Site. The King Archaeological Site is a 5-acre village on the south side of Foster's Bend on the Kusa River, about 16 miles west of Rome, Georgia. It was occupied for about 50 years during the 16th century. The site has been partially excavated by archaeologists Margaret Ashley in 1928, Robert Wauchop in 1939, David Haley between 1971 and 72, and Pat Garrow and David Haley 1992 and 1994. Take a close look at the layout of the village. This is very important. This is one of the key bits of evidence that I analyzed. Notice that the plaza is not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical, that the largest building is not in the center, neither is the plaza, and that there are multiple houses scattered around the rim, not just a single line of houses. On either side are ports that were man-made to give a place for canoes to beach when there are floods on the Kusa River. Here's the site plan. As I said, the village is only partially excavated. The western portion has never been excavated, and the area closest to the river has never been excavated because it was in the land covered by the floodplain of Weis Lake. The archaeological work at the King site was heavily publicized in Georgia news media in the early 1970s and again in the early 1900s. It was described as a typical Proto-Creek town that was a satellite village of the capital of Kusa, about 50 miles to the northeast. Georgia Creek saw a big problem, though, that the archaeologists had missed. This just didn't look like a typical Creek town. All references call the houses at the King site Proto-Creek, but they bore no resemblance to the real Proto-Creek houses, which were identical to the commoners' houses in southern Mexico. Notice the difference. This is the house at the King site. It strongly resembles an earth lodge. In fact, you might say it was an earth lodge, except that there is no grass in the southeast that will produce a sod, no native grass. All the grasses we have now on our lawns are from Siberia or from the Eurasian steppes. This is a typical Creek house from 1,000 years ago. It is identical to the houses built by the Totonacs and by the Itzamayas. Let's back up a bit and describe the geography and the history of northwest Georgia and northeast Alabama so you'll better understand the situation. This is a terrain map of northern Alabama and northern Georgia. I will explain the geography. This portion is considered the interior basin of the inner South. It is characterized by rolling hills and limestone soils. This is the Cumberland Plateau, which appears to be mountains when you're in it. It's actually highly eroded sections of the plateau. This is the Ridge and Valley Province. Again, it's sedimentary rock. It is characterized by long ridges or mountains that actually are not as tall as the upper Piedmont in elevation, but because of erosion, the difference between the base and the top of the mountains gives us a significant difference. This is the Great Appalachian Valley that goes from the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia down to central Alabama. It is noted for being highly fertile and containing dolomitic limestone, which produces an ideal situation for growing corn. This is the northern Piedmont of Georgia and South Carolina. It is granite-based soil that was created by volcanic activity. North central Georgia, northeast Georgia is the Blue Ridge Mountains. There are highly eroded igneous rock and contain also a line of ancient volcanoes that stretch from here to here. They're a different set of mountains and run at a different angle than the Blue Ridge. Close-up view of the area where the King Village is located. This is Rome, Georgia, which was Itaba, which means frontier boundary in the Muskogean languages. It's a different word than Etowah. The archaeological profession assumed that Itaba was Etowah, but they're entirely different words because the original Creek word is Itula, not anything like Etowah. Archaeologists found a line of occupation sites all the way down the river to what is now Lake Weis. Almost continuously you'll find artifacts along the river. To the north is one of those large mountains created by erosion, the Severing Rock, and again there's another. To the south is more rolling land with some mountains to the far south. Very fertile soil. It would have been an ideal place to grow corn. Here's a satellite image of the same area. Etula, that's Etowah Mounds. Kansaki, that's the Cherokees called New Echota. Itaba was Rome, Georgia. Ulibahali, that's the King site. It was visited by Hernando de Soto and Tristan de Luna. To the far west, we see what was called the Mother Island, but today is called McKee's Island, and it's near Guntersville, Alabama. It is on the Tennessee River. A closer view again of the satellite imagery. There are several large town sites that have never been excavated by archaeologists in the vicinity of Rome. Two of them are very close to the King site. This is a large town here. There's another large town here. Probably one here too. That they have designations as archaeological sites, but there's little known about these places because they were never really studied by professional archaeologists. This is that Georgia-Alabama line. And here you can see the relationship to the King site to Weis Lake, which is created by the damming of the Kusa River. It winds through the Ridge and Valley province. It has a very different feeling than most lakes, and it consists of many narrow channels working their way up the old valleys. Close-up view of the King site. Here it is right in here. And Foster Bend, where there's another large town site that's never been excavated. Here again, the King site, a later satellite image of the large town site. So actually the King site was a satellite village of this town, is a more correct way to describe it. Can you see these lines here? These are old channels of the Kusa River. It's very possible that when the Spanish came through in 1540 and 1560, the river did this, and that this was land. So it's a possibility that there was a town here too. Here we have a photograph that I took from downtown Rome that shows the confluence of the Etowah River, the Usnala River, to create the Kusa River. Downtown Rome would be to your right. To the left is a large country club and golf course and cemetery. This is downstream from Rome about 3 miles. At this point the river is very deep, moves relatively slow. However, at certain locations, even near the King site, it suddenly gets much faster moving and shallow due to rock shoals that push up into the riverbed that prevent the river from being deep. Here's a view of Weis Lake from the air. You can see the strange nature created by the lake, created by the Ridge and Valley province, where it consists of many wide channels branching off from the main lake. This is an aerial photograph from the middle 20th century or early 20th century, probably middle. This is the appearance of the King site before archaeologists came on. They would have cleared off the trees, perhaps only worked here, I don't know. There must be some reason why they didn't complete excavation of the village. It could be that the village extended to somebody else's property who did not get permission for excavation. There are many misconceptions about the ethnological history of the lower southeast, particularly in Georgia. Unfortunately, these are promoted both by references such as Wikipedia and by a large number of academicians who really don't know their history. What you see here is the first official map of the state of Georgia from 1785. Georgia was claiming all of the headwaters of the Savannah River. This is the boundary Georgia claimed. What they actually got in negotiations sponsored by the federal government is a boundary that went roughly like this. They kind of split the difference of what South Carolina claimed and Georgia claimed. So this is the boundary today. This is Tuglu, for those of you who know the area intimately, giving out of the place. But this is what is important. In 1785, almost all of North Georgia was labeled Upper Towns, the Creek Country inhabited by the Muskogee Nation. This was not Cherokee even after the American Revolution. Go to any map that you see on Wikipedia, anywhere else, you'll see all of North Georgia being traditional Cherokee. This just is not true. It's a myth made up in various pieces through the 20th century. North of the Kusa River, see the Kusa River here? That's the Chickasaw. You're probably not even aware that the Chickasaw live in Georgia, but actually up until the Revolution, there were Chickasaws in both sides of North Georgia and in southwest Georgia. They moved away from northeast Georgia during the Revolution, but they stayed here for a while. What happened was that the Chickasaw became allies of the Chickamauga Cherokees, and so they shared their fate. And so when the Chickamauga War ended in 1793, the Chickasaws moved all west and they completely vacated northeast Alabama. In particular, the Coosawattee-Etowah River basins experienced a century of increasingly competent archaeological excavations, but mainly research anthropological interpretations. Once academic authority figures established these speculations, it apparently never dawned on later generations of archaeologists and historians to challenge orthodoxies, or maybe they were afraid to. However, academicians have written a legion of books and papers about its 5-decade occupation by the Cherokees. This is something that I find extremely strange. The ancestors of the Yuchi, the Chickasaw, the Creeks have lived in northern Alabama, northern Georgia, and South Carolina for perhaps thousands of years. Almost nothing is written about these days. The Cherokees only had 100 members of their tribe in Georgia at the time the American Revolution began. That was a census taken by the Redcoats. And at that time, Georgia stretched all the way to the Mississippi River. Just one town like Kusa had over 3,000 houses. Yet today, professors spend all of their energies on a very brief period between 1785 and 1738, when there was a much smaller population of Cherokees living in the region. That's something we also have to deal with. When people don't write, they don't question, they don't do research, and so it leaves an unfinished book for most of the Southern Appalachians past. In 1991, the Bush administration adopted this modified map, which tells us that the Yuchi, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Alabama, Shawnee, Catawba, Wassaw, Calusa to Appalachia, Lumbee, Casavo, Saponi, Satili, Calusa, Powhatan, Chichamauga, Tunica, Osage, Quanachita, and Washita, and Natchez peoples never existed. Look at here. They don't even have the Choctaws, which is one of the largest tribes in the United States. See, it says unknown. However, the original 1989 map also left out the creeks, which showed all of Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina as always being occupied by the Cherokees. This entire region. That's the 7-state region. Whenever the Cherokees brag about, we once lived in 7 states. Well, it's baloney. They did not. It can be argued that the Creeks once lived in 7 states, but there's no mention of the Cherokees on any map before 1715. This seems to be, well, that's just, it doesn't really matter, it's just a map. But no, it's important because the federal government gives funds for historic preservation and archaeological research by the federally recognized tribes based on the area assigned to them. So they get no money for their lands in Mississippi if they're Choctaw. They get very little, the Creeks get very little income from Georgia because they're only shown to live in a place where actually the Creeks only lived briefly. This is not traditional Creek territory. They moved into this region in the 1700s. Again and again and again, we find that what people in the mainstream consider to be trivial history actually has a major impact on today as far as the level of academic research, the attitude of archaeologists, and the funds available to protect Native American heritage sites. But there's much, much more to this mystery. Let's look at the Native American history of the Kusa Valley. From around 15,000 BC to 1000 BC, the native peoples in northern Georgia and Alabama were very similar to other bands in the southern highlands and Piedmont regions, perhaps even the entire southeast. There's not a whole lot different in their cultural traits. That means how they lived, the artifacts they made, how they ate, and where they traveled. They were characterized by seasonal migrations. There was no one village they lived in, we think. Instead, they had a base village, say on a river, that was particularly good location for canoeing and maybe for providing food. But then throughout the year, they would travel to other village sites where there was particularly a large amount of food at that time. For example, they might go to one valley where there were many muscadine grapes available in August and September to gather grapes, and then move a little bit higher up in the mountains to gather nuts in October. 2 different village sites, same people. Then the Deptford culture arrived. Now the Deptford culture originated in Savannah and is believed to be associated with the arrival of the Yuchi people by water from across the Atlantic. However, it spread inland into the south, covering much of the lower southeast eventually. It was most prevalent, though, in the southern highlands and upper Piedmont, particularly in the headwaters of the Chattahoochee and the Etowah River. We have permanent villages appearing that were obviously involved in the early stages of agriculture. Probably they did not have large cultivated fields, and their form of agriculture took the appearance of maybe large gardens and kitchen gardens, but this was agriculture. These villages stayed in the same place for hundreds of years, and in fact, in the case of the upper Chattahoochee River, archaeologist Robert Washop found village sites that were first occupied perhaps around 1000 BC They were almost continuously occupied by somebody all the way until around 1700 AD, when that was just after a massive smallpox epidemic wiped out much of the population of the region. Another thing that's interesting is that the Deptford houses were identical to the houses built until the early 20th century by the southern Sami of Scandinavia. They're also known as Lapps. The Cato also built this type of house in Louisiana and in eastern Texas. Some of the Deptford villages in North Georgia built mounds, not all, but some, and some of those mounds are quite large. This particular mound was on the upper Chattahoochee River. It's now covered by Lake Lanier. There was no radiocarbon date taken, but it probably dates from 800, maybe older, we don't know, being that there was no radiocarbon date. Another culture came in that reflected influence from Peru. It's known as the Swift Creek culture. They built large towns in northwest Georgia, in northeast Georgia, and in southwest Georgia and around Macon. The mound at the Leak Village site, as archaeologists call it, which is 2 miles downstream from Etowah Mounds, had a mound who's covered the same area as Mound A at Etowah. It covered 2 acres. They also had a large burial mound. My portrayal of this village in this virtual reality image is speculation. I have to be honest. We know the shape of the houses because the site has been partially excavated, but I think they also had gardens inside the town, and that the town itself had kind of a loose character to it. It was not densely developed. I could be very wrong, but this is the probable appearance of the town. Around 600 AD, a new type of architecture appeared in the Nacoochee Valley. This is the Eastwood Site, immediately west of the Kennemere Mound in the Nacoochee Valley, for those who are familiar with the Nacoochee. It is the oldest town site that contains all aspects of the Chickasaws' unique architectural traditions. Their traditions included oval houses with off-center doors, paired mounds, but not very large, and in front of the mounds, very large rectangular house, or let's say communal building, with 4 posts, which function as the meeting place for the entire town. Some Chickasaw stayed in northeast Georgia. This is something that, again, that's left out of the history books. Some always were in northeast Georgia until after the Revolution. But the majority of the tribe, as their numbers expanded, started moving farther and farther west to where their capital during, let's say around 1400 AD, was located on the Tennessee River near Muscle Shoals. Between 900 AD and 1300 AD, the villages on the Kusa River were very similar to those in the suburbs of Tula, Etowah Mounds, about 35 miles to the south. North of the Kusa River were villages with architecture like the Eastwood Site. They were the ancestors of the Chickasaw. So we can safely assume that the Chickasaw lived in northwest Georgia from 900 AD to, say, 1780 AD. Somewhere in that, like that lines. This is not mentioned all on any map or in any state textbook. The public is led to believe that the only place the Chickasaw lived was western Tennessee, which just is not true. That was the last place they lived, and it was never the center of their main population. The first Kusa Village appeared, and I use the word, this is the English word Kusa, on the Oostanala River around 1300 AD. Now the Oostanala is created near Calhoun, Georgia, at the confluence of the Kusawati and the Conasauga. This location has had human occupation since the Ice Age. There were towns here during the Woodland period, the late Woodland period. There's a Woodstock village here, which I didn't get into as far as showing you drawing, and then continued in houses like those at Etowah, and finally Chickasaw on the north side, and then the Kusa people on the south side. This is what the first Kusa village looked like around 1300 AD. Notice how much it resembles earth lodges. It does not look at all like the Chickasaw houses or the Creek houses. Why no one noticed this, I don't know. As an architect, it was immediately obvious to me this is a different people. But again, you read the archaeological tests, they use the name of the pottery that was produced, Baxter phase pottery, they call it, and then call it Proto-Creek Indian pottery. But obviously, this is a very different culture than what was going on north of the river with the Chickasaw, or to the east or south with the ancestors of the Creeks. Around 1325, the Kusa built a village at the confluence of the Kusawati River and Talking Rock Creek. This is now the lower reservoir at Carter's Lake. This is the location of Carter's Dam right here. Originally was a 40-foot high waterfall there. Then, at the exact same time that the middle occupation of Etowah Mounds was ceased, people abandoned the town for some reason. We only can speculate. A capital was built here. Now, this capital, it was where only the elite lived, not the commoners, and it displayed all the characteristics of a ancestral Creek town, which is very similar to the formerly planned towns in southern Mexico. This is the commoners, this is the elite, this is what it looked like when Hernando de Soto came here in the summer of 1540. De Soto's men camped here on a rocky knoll overlooking the elite thing, so they could fire down into the village if there were problems. It doesn't say that in the chronicles of the De Soto expedition, but it's obvious if you walk the land, you'll know that's why he put his men up there with their firearms. They could control the elite. This site has never been excavated. It is owned by the federal government. It's in pristine condition. It's never been plowed because it's rocky. There's no telling what's under the soil there, since the Spanish were there for at least 6 weeks. Here's a closer view of the elite village. Notice it's very different architecture and town planning than the so-called Kusa villages. Why? Again, I don't understand it. I mean, the archaeologists see these things and they don't go beyond naming the pottery with English names when it's obviously something was wrong. Well, they're calling everybody Creek. Now, this looks like a Lamar Culture Creek town from that period, which makes me believe that the elite of that province were Creeks, but the commoners were some other culture, which we're trying to find out in this program. Here's another view. This is looking, if you imagine I'm in a drone or a helicopter over the commoner village. I'm looking west towards the elite village. Here's the Kusawati River. Here is Talking Rock Creek, and this is the hill where De Soto men's camped. There's a long, low ridge on this side, very steep mountains on the other side, and a fault line. The architecture, very different. This is the elite, definitely ancestors of the Creek people. This is the commoners, different layout to the town, entirely different architecture. Much of what we know about the province of Kusa comes from the chronicles of the De Soto Expedition, and then 20 years later, a company of Spanish soldiers and priests who were sent north from Pensacola in order to get food for a struggling Spanish colony at Pensacola. It was called the Tristan de Luna Expedition. Here we have eyewitness accounts. They tell us that the people of Kusa were very skilled farmers, and they particularly liked to grow fruit trees and nut trees. They said they had, they didn't say acres, we'll say they had hundreds of acres of cultivated hickory trees, which they processed into hickory nut oil and hickory nut butter, and that was the main export product of the town. They also had large orchards of purple plums. That's the Mexican purple plum, which means they brought those seeds from Mexico. They had native red plums. They had a type of apple that's now known as the Biltmore Apple, which strongly resembles the wild Eurasian apple being grown in Europe perhaps 2,000 years ago. It's very rare now. Generally, the Biltmore apples you see today are cultivars that are where they've crossed back the Biltmore apple, which looks like a true apple, with native crab apples. This is a scene in the plaza and the elite precinct in which Hernando de Soto and his captains meet the representative of the Miko or Tawa Miko of Kusa, who was said to be a very well-educated and intelligent young man. This is a scene, this is one of the pyramidal temple mounds in the precinct of Kusa. The reason I know so much about the architecture of the precinct is in 2006, the lake was drained, and I was able to get onto the site of Kusa for the first time since 1970 with my camera and with my measuring equipment, and able to actually measure the locations and the sizes of these mounds that have been covered with water for so many decades. Now, looking back, this is the site of the original Kusa village from 1300. De Luna's company was stationed at a village that was called Kusa. They wrote down as Kusa. They actually called it Kosha. And they were puzzled because several of the men had been on the original Soto Expedition, and it looked nothing like what they remembered the capital of Kusa. It only had, they said, around 30 houses, whereas the capital had 3,000 houses. This story is repeated by many professors in writing books about the 1500s in the southeast, but because they were not from this area, they didn't catch something very important. The physical description of the village where the De Luna's people stayed is entirely different than the capital of Kusa. They described it as a broad floodplain, and off to the northeast was a large ridge that ran from horizon to horizon. That is the Cahuita Mountains, and this is Fort Mountain. That is not the description of the capital. The capital has steep mountains rising immediately beyond the precinct of the city, and they rise straight up, and you can't see out of the valley in any direction. Let's look at the word Kusa. This is another thing that the academicians never sought to find out the meaning of Kusa, or even how to pronounce it. Very few Caucasian anthropologists who claim to be experts in the southeastern mound builders even know how to pronounce the Creek or Spanish town names, much less know their meanings. Kosha is the late medieval Castilian way of writing Kosha. Okay, it's not pronounced Kusa. Kusa is an English word derived from the Cherokee proper noun Anikusha, which is their name for all upper creeks. There are 4 surviving Creek languages: Muskogee, Ishati, Koshi, and Koshati. Upper Creeks living in Oklahoma today do not even know what their name means. That same word in Muskogee Creek means beggar or vagrant in the dominant Muskogee Creek language of Oklahoma, but obviously that is not what the original meaning was. Charles Hudson, a late 20th century archaeologist, labeled Kusa as a Proto-Creek paramount chieftain in northwest Georgia, northeast Alabama, and southeast Tennessee. But he didn't even know how to pronounce the original indigenous word, or he was not even aware there was another word It's not mentioned in any of his books about Kusa. The actual Creek word is Koshi, which has no interpretation of Muskogee Creek other than a proper noun meaning offspring of Kaw. This is very important. Now, in Ishiti Creek, Koshi would mean descendants or offspring of an eagle. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There was only one village or town downstream from the capital of Kusa that had a name that could be translated with a Muskogee Creek dictionary. That's Tulamachasi, which means town new. To me, that also was sent up red flags that maybe what they called a Proto-Creek chieftain of Kusa was actually a multi-ethnic province. And given the multi-ethnic nature of the area when English settlers arrived, it's highly likely that at least the province contained an elite, a Muskogean Creek elite, a large Chickasaw population, and then to the south of the Kusa River, some other tribe X. We'll find out what tribe X was. Around 1794, the Cherokees occupied the site where Tristan de Luna's men had camped in 1560. The village site was named Kansaki, Konza people in Creek, or Gansagiyi in Cherokee, Kansa people place of. Here in 1825, they would build their new capital of Echota. Why would a village in northwest Georgia have the name that means place of the Konza people? The Konza were on the Great Plains. That doesn't make any sense, or does it? Here's a map from 1800. It's Gansagiyi, Kansa, people, place of. To the northeast, about 3 miles, was Ushtanali, which is not a Cherokee word as everybody thinks it is a Muskogean word. There are two possible explanations for Koshi. It could be a hybrid Itsamaya Muskogee word from Georgia. Koshi means descendants of the Eagle and Ishiti, the predominant Creek language of Georgia. Ishiti mixed Muskogean from the northeastern Mexico with Itza from the southern Mexico. According to Spanish chroniclers, a wooden eagle and nest were on a tall pole in the plaza of the capital of Koshi. Okay, that makes sense. If they're descendants of eagle and they seem to have eagle is a very prominent feature of their town plaza, maybe that's the meaning of the word. But there's another explanation. It could be a Panoan word from eastern Peru. There are actually several key Panoan words in the Creek languages. The Kashabo people, actually Koshibo, were an alliance of Panoan-speaking tribes living on the coast of South Carolina. Their name means strong or elite, place of, in English, but these are not Creek words. These are Panoan from Peru. There's still an ethnic group of the same name living today in Satipo province, Peru. Satipo was also the name of the capital town and an indigenous province on the Satilla River in southeast Georgia. It was south of Fort Caroline. That's one of the many reasons that we know that Fort Caroline was in Georgia on the Altamaha River, not in Jacksonville, because there was the Georgia tribe south of the fort. If there's a Georgia tribe south of the fort on a river named after that tribe, the Satilla River, obviously Fort Caroline was in Georgia. We'll look again at the site here in detail of where Echota was built. This is probably called Koshi Usanala. We don't know, but it's a site that has two designated archaeological site numbers, but has never been excavated by archaeologists. Immediately to the southwest is a pond 1,700 feet across, which is created by a meteor or asteroid or a comet. Then there's a site of New Echota here, and then on the north side of the river was a woodland period village site. Now, if you read the discussion of the archaeology of the Kusa River, you'll be told that the people who settled at the confluence of the Ustanala and the Kusa and the Kansa River, right here, made pottery and had houses like the people of McKee Island near Guntersville, Alabama. That should have raised flags again, but again, they call them creeks, but entirely different pottery, entirely different houses. And the fact they know they came from McKee Island to this site and then became a much larger property from the one town spread to be many towns. These are other known creek towns in the area: Itula, Itaba, Ilabahali, Apiki, and Talasi down farther. Let's look at the Kaw or Kansa people. Okay, we know for a fact now both the Creeks and the Cherokees in their names said that the Kansa lived where New Echota was later built. That's not a speculation. The Cherokees would have not given that location that name unless the Kansa were living there at one time. The Kaw Nation, first we're going to read from Wikipedia. The Kaw Nation, or Konza, is a federally recognized Native American tribe in Oklahoma. They come from the central Midwestern United States. The tribe known as Kaw, also been known as People of the South Wind, People of Water, Kansa, Kasa, Kosa, and Kosa. The name of the state of Kansas comes from the French spelling of their name. Their tribal language, Kasa or Konza, is classified as Siouan language, which is quite different than northern Siouan languages such as Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot. Okay, Wikipedia, are you sure about that? Why don't we talk to the elders, the Kaw elders? They might tell us a little bit different story. Okay, then this is what the Konza elders state, and it's been written down in published books by ethnologists. Not archaeologists, mind you, ethnologists. The Konza migration legend states that their people originally lived on the island. The island became too crowded, so they moved to a fertile river valley where they learned how to grow corn and prospered. They grew into a new nation. In the not too distant past, they fled this land because of attacks by an enemy and first settled on the Mississippi River. They then migrated to Kansas and took up the lifestyle of Plains Indians. Some versions of the story now say they came from the Midwest, but this is because the Kaw people have been told that by anthropology and history professors, who themselves have no reason to back up their statement. Keep in mind, the critical thing is that they did not leave their homeland until fairly late, and we know for a fact that the Kaw did not arrive in Kansas to around 1670 AD. That's long after white men were living in North America. In carrying out the research for this documentary, I noticed something very interesting and in fact somewhat disturbing for someone who believes in scientific research like myself. All of the Wikipedia articles and public portrayals of the history of the Earth Lodge tribes on the Great Plains now have public statements that coincide with what the professors told them their origin was. Yet, when I would contact tribal officials, I would get a very different story. For example, the Quapaw were thoroughly researched by a ethnologist who spent time with their elders, tape recorded all of their legends, then published it in a book. The elders said they were from the southeast, that their first contact with white men was in the vicinity of Georgetown, South Carolina, which is Winyah Bay, and then they migrated westward. Yet when you look at their tribal website and the Wikipedia article, it tells a very different story. This was consistent for all the tribes. Elders from the Kansa were more emphasized the story of the being on an island and then migrating around from that island, whereas the Wikipedia article that you read, which reflects current archaeological texts, state that they migrated from the Midwest around Ohio, then lived in Cahokia, then moved out to the Great Plains. The elders never said that. They never mentioned Cahokia or anything like that. These are all speculations and myths created by white college professors who have been force-fed to the Native American tribes. But let's look closely at the linguistics of the situation with the Kansa. What made me suspicious from the beginning was that the Konza were portrayed in the 1700s and early 1800s wearing Muskogean type clothing, not the garb of the Great Plains tribes. Notice that Montatusia is wearing a Creek turban. You don't see this on the people such as Lakota, Sioux, the Cheyenne, yet they're all Plains tribes. As far as the language goes, in Konza, Call means wind, Akal means south wind. The other name is people of the south wind. In Ishiti Creek, Call means eagle. In Isamaya, Call means eagle. Kalshi means offspring of the eagle in Ishiti Creek. The Call people have two clans, White Eagle Clan and Black Eagle Clan. Then we have the Cahuita Creeks from North Georgia. We were the dominant division of the Creek Confederacy in the 1700s. They were the home of the Wind Clan, and Creeks to this day can't figure out why are they called the Wind Clan tribe when this is not the word for wind in Muskogee Creek. Obviously these people spoke another language earlier, because this means wind people, or it can mean eagle people, because it gets confusing because the Upper Creeks were always known as the Eagle Warriors. Now the Upper Creeks lived in the same area that Kansaki was in, the town we showed you earlier in our program where Neochoto is now. The Creeks living there call themselves Eagle Warriors, just like the Call people did. There's more connections. I compared the key words of the Kansa language with various tribes, and where I found that the closest relationship was with the Chickasaw. There are several loan words in the Call language which are Muskogean or Maya and come from the Chickasaw. For example, the word for town in the Chickasaw is Tama, which actually is the Maya and Ishiti Creek word for trade. Tama is also the word for a town for the Kansa. Now, where would the Kansa would have gone to market their agricultural goods but to a town like Ushtanali, which was a Chickasaw town? So that is how they got the word. They were in association, close association with the Chickasaw. That only could have occurred in early colonial times in northwest Georgia and in northern Alabama. So that places them in a very different place than Ohio. Look at this. This is a man portrayed in a picture from 1850, a Kansa man. Look at his cap and his beads. This is a photograph of a Shipibo man in Satipo Province, Peru, 2015. Same style hat, same style beads. This is not traditional Plains Indian wear. We know that the Pinoans had a profound influence on the clothing and the ceremonial garb of the Creeks and the Seminoles. So it's not surprising this man be wearing what we'd call a Seminole cap. But if the Konza were from Ohio and Indiana, they would not have been exposed to Pinoan cultural traditions. This is something that's also been missed. The archaeologists who worked on the King site in the 1970s, early 1990s defined it by pottery styles of English names. It was described as a Proto-Creek Village site and a satellite village of Kusa. Yet in the same breath, they said the people who came from Kusa brought with him a pottery style, with an English name, of course, from McKee Island. They call it the McKee Island pottery. Now, again, that raises flags that these people maybe are not Creeks, but then it never crossed their mind they were dealing with an entirely different ethnic group. The original portrayal of the King Village looked like this. This is what we saw for about 25 years or more in all publications, that the King Village was a semicircle containing Creek-style houses with a Creek-style rectangular council house in the middle and a round plaza in the middle that opened directly to the Kusa River. You saw at the beginning of our program that is not at all what the King site looked like. I have no idea why the artists or the young archaeologists working on the King site portrayed the village in a way it in no way resembles. Then in the 1990s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers commissioned a professional artist to do a painting of the King site. It's a little closer in appearance. It's U-shaped, that's correct, but it places a round plaza in the center. The council house, just a typical Creek house, oversized house with a smaller house beside it in the center, and then a thin line of houses on three sides, but not the river. Actually, the town extended like out in here. It was much longer shape to the town plan. As for some reason, the archaeologists have never excavated this part of the site and this part of the site. They showed the center of the town being a large pole, when actually what the archaeologists found was a broad black spot in the soil created by a bundle of timbers at the center of the village in the plaza. Let's take a look at what they actually found at the King site. Here's the town plan again. Notice it's asymmetrical, it's not round, it's U-shaped. The council house or whatever it was is not in the center of the village, and there's a cluster of houses around it that have covered entrances. That's not shown on either one of the paintings done by the archaeologists. Two ports here and here. That's left off the other, but it shows up on the infrared and satellite imagery. I created this map by directly tracing the archaeologist's site plan and then filling in on this side where and here where they never worked. But I think it's fairly accurate. This is what the village would look like at ground level. The houses would have been like earth lodges, except they would have had thatch roofs because there's no grass in the southeast, no native grass, whatever, that'll produce a sod. In the center was a bundle of timbers. Here's some of the houses that they created. Corner entrance, off-centered entrance, centered entrance. This is all built at the same time. The council house was like a big house with a earth berm on the sides, thatch on top. This is a summer house that had cane walls. Again, it's another view of the house. You get a view. You see it's very similar to an earth lodge. In this version, I show it having bark roof. That's possible too. Either one was used in the southeast, sometimes in the same village. But the covered entrance is a key feature that's left out of the official drawings. This is what the interior of the house looked like. 4 columns, always 4 columns, with a hearth in the center. This is the Chocopah, or council house. Chocopah is a Maya word that was absorbed by the Creeks. The council house of the kingdom had 3 terraces sculpted into the soil, as seating arrangements with packed clay. So it's like a indoor arena. This is what the summer house looked like. It was essentially like a Florida room or a screen porch. But that's not the only place in Georgia where you find these type houses in this type of village. Either the Konza people are a group closely related to the Konza, like the Mandan occupied a village on the Ocmulgee River east of President Warner Robins from around 1300 AD to 1600 AD. It's called the Bullard Landing site. It contains 28 large house sites built on mounds to get them above the flooding level. Each of the houses would be large enough for an extended family. This is typical of the Konza too. This is the appearance of the Bullard Landing site. It's bigger than the King Village and lasted much longer. Most of the buildings are exactly like the King Village site. There's a creek, round chokapa, that's typical of many villages along the Ocmulgee River. It was like a great tapu. And then there was a round temple on a pedestal on this raised area. Otherwise, it's almost identical to the King Village, but it's just much larger. Here you see the asymmetrical plaza, not formally planned. Okay. The King Village and the Bullard Landing are identical to a Mandan Village from the 1700s. Look at this drawing. This is one of the earliest known drawings of a Mandan Village. They have a thatch roof in the council house, a rectangular council house. It's off center. This shows a round plaza, but actually the space is not round. The houses have thatch roofs, just like the King Village and Bullard, and then earthen walls reinforced by timbers. In the center is a bundle of timbers of the plaza. Amazing. Why didn't someone catch the similarity? Maybe the archaeologists in Georgia didn't want to be controversial by saying, hey, this is the same thing as the Konza and Mandan, but obviously it is. Here's a typical Mandan, Arikara, or Konza house. In the foreground is the bundle of trees that's always found in their plazas. Is the interior of a Konza house on the Great Plains. The only difference between it and the King Village houses is that we think that the King Village houses had vertical walls, and whereas the Great Plains houses seem to have had sloping walls. Now here's a Konza summer house from the 1800s, identical to the summer houses at the King Village site and at Bullard Landing in Middle Georgia. Next to it is a cooking shelter that's identical to those two sites in Georgia also. Here's another view. This is a Konza winter house with a thatch roof in Kansas. Here's the interior with 4 columns and then vertical timbers around it to have a straight wall like the house at in the King site. So this house would be identical to a house at the King site. Since the first contact of Europeans with the Kansa, all scholars assumed that they had originated somewhere on the Mississippi River or the Midwest. However, there was never a shred of physical archaeological evidence to match that single Kansa village with any location on the Mississippi River or the Midwest. Oh, but there's more to our story. You see, when the Kashi or Kansa, how you want to call them, left the King Village and later left the site on the Oostenaula River, some of them actually migrated down the Kusa River to near Childersburg, Alabama, and rebuilt a town by the same name. And they became the leading tribe of the Upper Creeks during the 1700s, and they kind of flitted away. Tuckabachi became the principal town later on of the Upper Creeks. So not all of the Konza went west. Here's Gunnersville. This is their route to the upper Kusa Valley. Then here's where some of them followed the Kusa River down to Childersburg and stayed, and then from then on they became basically creeks. Culturally, they were a little different than the Muskogean creeks. Now this is an overview of the migration legends told by the elders of the Dagian people, or Earth Lodge Sioux. Quapaw elders say they came from the coast of South Carolina. The Mandans say they came from the center of the South, went down to the area around the Mississippi River, and across the river from them was an advanced people who spoke the same language they did. This is very interesting information. But they were very advanced. They lived in mounds, and that they taught the Mandan how to grow corn. It makes me wonder, though, that actually that maybe they never went to the Mississippi here, that in fact they were, the town across from them was somewhere in the vicinity of Georgia or Alabama, where there would be a creek town across that would have taught them how to grow corn. This was just speculation. But in any case, the Mandan went up the Mississippi, went up to the headwaters of the Mississippi, then came back down, and then went up to as far north on the Missouri River as they could grow corn. The Arikawa did the same thing. Quapaw say we're showing the Kansa migration either from middle Georgia or from northwest Georgia. That's not part of their elders saying, they just say they came from the east. Perhaps the Osage came from the area around Kentucky. We don't know, but they have a similar migration legend. The Oto, which are not shown on the map, that is a division of the Creek Confederacy. The Otosi were either on the Ocmulgee River or the Chattahoochee River. They consider themselves closely related to the Quapaw and Konza, which is kind of understandable. They probably were the same people at one time. As far as Konza people being in Cahokia, there's absolutely no evidence. This is the architecture of the Hopal culture. Very, very different than both the Konza people and the Creeks. This type of mound here actually was copied from the ancestors of the Creeks. It was built right at the end of the Hopal culture. In fact, might even represent a cultural contribution by the ancestors of the Creeks to this area, building a mound as a shrine. But the earlier Hopal architecture was nothing like Konza. There's no evidence of the Konza living in Cahokia either. Just speculations by professors. Konza architecture, again, was also very different than Cahokia. There's nothing to connect them with Cahokia other than it makes a nice story told by an anthropology professor or history professor. The Mandans specifically say they originated in the southeast, not Ohio. This is not what the website on Wikipedia says, but when you talk to Mandan elders, they say they came from the southeast and they at one time lived near the Gulf Coast. The Quapaw, sister tribe of the Kansas, said they first met white men on the Atlantic coast of South Carolina, not Ohio. Here is a Kusa Village around 1865. Notice that both men are wearing Creek turbans, Creek long shirts, Creek leggings. The houses no longer have earth berms, but they differ very little than the earth shelters we showed you, except they don't have the dirt aside them. But people in academia these days are very conservative, and they always like to have a famous authority figure make a statement first before they will go inside with it. If you're not an authority figure in their own profession, specific profession, they'll negate your credibility by saying, well, you're not one of us, you're not, you've not been approved by your peers of our profession. So I said, okay, it looks very obvious that the Konza were from northwest Georgia and northern Alabama. And in fact, there's a village name placed to the Kansa in northwest Georgia. But again, they said, well, that's the opinion of a Creek architect, not a PhD in anthropology. So I was going to leave it at that, and then I stumbled upon, oh my gosh, Albert Goschet, the leading ethnologist of the 19th century. He was a German-American who was employed by the Smithsonian, became the expert on both the Southeastern Indians and the Great Plains Indians. I will quote from a report he gave to the Smithsonian in 1885. The Kusa or Upper Creeks of North Georgia and Alabama were the ancestors or perhaps close relatives of the Konza Indians. Other names for the Kusa were Kosha, Kosa, Kalsha, Kusa, Kasa, Koyusa, and Kalshi. The Upper Creeks now call themselves the Kalshi. Some of those words that they were called are the exact same words that the Kaw Indians were called. Bingo! Creek architect came to the same conclusion that a world-famous ethnologist came to over 100 years ago. The Konza originated from northeast Alabama and northwest Georgia and then migrated westward. Case closed. Thank you for joining us for this program. We'll have many more programs in the future.